I stood in the closet staring through the thin slits in the door. Maxine, my babysitter, had closed the door and told me to stay quiet. She was in the corner of the room on the phone with the police. She had been tucking me into bed when we heard a loud crash downstairs. The door must have splintered for as hard as it slammed open. Maxine pushed me into the closet and told me not to make a sound. I stood there silently watching as the man in black strolled into the bedroom. I went to gasp and, in the process, covered my mouth with my hands so as not to make a sound. The man was holding a large knife. He let this knife hang at his waist as he swayed back and forth with his hips and stood but a few feet from Maxine. She was screaming into the receiver at this point. "He's here in the room. Help me. He's just staring at me," the man said in a voice that was probably not nearly as deep as I remember. "You've been a bad girl, Maxine." The man brought the knife to his other hand and raised it over his head before bringing it down with both hands into Maxine's chest. The phone fell from her hands and onto the floor as she let out a gurgling sound and blood leaked from the side of her mouth and down her chin. The man laughed and pulled the knife out, only to stab again and again. I could see red lights flashing around the bedroom window and hear sirens. The man turned to leave the room, but not before saying, "I hope you enjoyed the show, little boy." I was 8 years old. 10 years of therapy and more than a decade of life after that, and I was living with my wife and teenage daughter in a house at the edge of town. I worked in the IT department of a Fortune 500 company that had an office in a nearby city. My wife Anna worked as a part-time sculptor and spent most of her time in her studio or taking our daughter Kara to various extracurricular activities. We were a happy family, and while my wife knew about the traumatic experience I had as a child, she did a lot to ensure it didn't get to me. Kara had hit a rebellious period in her life. She had been caught twice in the past couple of months, sneaking away from her ballet class to hang out with a boy from her school. I roughed him up pretty bad. Had his parents decided to press charges, I would have lost my job and the life I'd built up for myself. It was one of those instances where his parents were just as angry with him as I was, and glad they didn't have to punish him themselves. My wife was less than pleased. To say that I have a temper is a bit of an understatement. Seeing what I saw at such a young age left me with an emptiness few will ever understand. I've gone out of my way to avoid confrontation, but when confrontation shows up, I'm a force to be reckoned with. In 14 years of marriage and 13 years as a father, I'd never so much as raised my voice at my wife or daughter, and even still, the both of them had seen me unload on someone else, and that was enough to leave a feeling of unease with the family. When Kara was 7 years old, a neighbor called her fat, and I responded by making the man eat his own teeth. Kara smiled and called me her superhero for that one. She wasn't so thrilled about the way I battered her boyfriend. I take anti-anxiety medication. This, in conjunction with a few thought-stopping techniques learned through therapy, allows me to function as a productive member of society. Most people in my office refer to me as a gentle giant. For all of my imposing size and mass, they're as comfortable around me as they would be a kitten. I like that. I'm actually kind of hurt and offended when someone's afraid of or intimidated by me. My wife said that I should give Kara a bit more freedom. I had gone out of my way to shield her from the evils of the world. Whereas I knew firsthand what kind of evil lived in the heart of men, she was young and naive. Instead of being grateful, she complained that I was keeping her prisoner. Anna suggested that I allow her to pick up a few hours as a babysitter. I was adamantly opposed to the idea. Anna responded by saying, "Mike, not every girl that babysits for the family down the road is horribly murdered. I know it's a sore subject, but this is a great way for you to move on." I told her I would think about it and spent the next several hours looking up crime reports and statistics, trying to prove her wrong. When the evidence backed her claim and discredited my belief, I went along with it. The Millers were a family that lived across the road and had a 6-year-old son. Kara would make roughly $10 an hour to watch little Christian while his parents went out for the evening. They promised they'd be home by midnight, and Anna promised me that she'd check in on Kara, so I let my wife handle it. Unbeknownst to my wife, I spent most of the night in the yard with a pair of binoculars, watching the house and ready to run over at the first sign of trouble. Nothing happened. Over time, it became a weekly event. The Millers would go out to dinner and Kara would watch Christian. I got more comfortable with the arrangement as time went on, and Kara seemed more relaxed around the house. She had gone a full 6 months without calling me a Nazi. Anna would comment that she was proud of me for moving on from time to time, and our marriage became more stable as a result. I was doing so well, until one night when Kara came home smelling like cheap vodka. Kara had sneaked an older boy over to the Miller's home, and he brought the alcohol. He had left before the Millers returned home, but Kara couldn't hide the fact that she was intoxicated. She was grounded for a month, and the Millers were furious. It was only after she apologized and agreed to see a therapist that she was allowed to pick up another babysitting job. And this time around, she was working with a family in a nearby suburb, the Smiths. I dropped Kara off at the Smith home around 6 in the evening, and she would watch their daughter, Ashley. Ashley was 8 years old and just as bossy and rebellious as Kara, and they got along swimmingly. And Kara was instructed to call us if anything came up, and I made it a point to stay next to my phone while she was gone. The first few weeks were fairly uneventful. It was late September when Kara called home early and asked if Anna would join her there at the house. Kara reported hearing a scratching at the window. I was ready to rush over there guns blazing, but Anna suggested she check it out first. When Anna made it over to the Smith home, she reported seeing a couple of raccoons scratching at the back door. Even still, it was enough to scare the hell out of me. I was dead set on ending her little experiment at that time, but Kara told me I was being unreasonable. She had just recently turned 14, and I decided it was time to tell her my big secret. She sat across from me and rolled her eyes as I started. When I was 8 years old, my babysitter Maxine had a habit of sneaking boys into the house. And to the best of my knowledge, my parents never found out about it. Kara rolled her eyes a bit further and sighed, saying, "Is that why you're so neurotic, Dad?" I replied, "Let me finish." She turned her attention to something in the other room and exhaled as she said, "Fine, whatever." I continued. One night, while Maxine was tucking me in, there was a loud crash downstairs. Someone had kicked in the door. A man dressed in black wearing a ski mask came directly up to the bedroom and killed Maxine right in front of me. He spoke to me before disappearing into the night. He was never caught. By this point, Kara was sitting up in her seat and staring at me. She asked, "What did he say?" I sighed and said, "I hope you enjoyed the show, little boy." Anna put a hand on my shoulder and I reached up and held it as I continued. He said that, and then he just walked out. I never even responded. I just stood there. Kara crawled into my lap and gave me a big hug as she said, "I'm sorry, Dad. You must be so worried about me. I can stop babysitting if you want." I held my daughter with tears in my eyes and replied, "No, honey, I'm proud of you. Just don't get into any more trouble." I'd soon come to regret those words. It was a Friday night. Kara was watching Ashley. Anna and I were on the couch watching Doctor Who on Netflix. At around 10 in the evening, Kara called Anna saying she thought she saw someone lingering by the trash cans at the edge of the driveway. Anna rushed over there and I pulled out my phone to play some 2048. I had taken a Xanax for before the last episode of Doctor Who and was more than a little out of it. An hour or so had passed and I hadn't received a text from Anna telling me everything was fine. It wasn't like her to not tell me everything was fine. I got in my car and rushed over to the Smith home. The lights were on, but the front door was standing wide open. I called the police but didn't wait for them to arrive. With my phone in my hand, I walked inside that house fearing for the worst. The door frame had splintered, and there was a muddy boot print on the door. I dropped the phone and rushed up the stairs to see a man in black standing in the doorway of one of the bedrooms holding a bloody knife. No amount of tranquilizer could quench my rage in that moment. I rushed him. He brought the knife up. I slammed a hand down on his wrist, causing him to drop the knife. He punched me in the face. I didn't even flinch as he drew back for another, and I leaned in and shoulder-checked him in the doorway. As he slid to the ground, I kicked him repeatedly in the ribs. For a brief moment, I looked up, and what I saw pushed me over any ledge that still remained. Anna and Kara were lying in pools of their own blood at the foot of Ashley's bed. Ashley was nowhere to be found. The man groaned in pain and I kicked him again. I leaned over him and said, "Don't die on me yet. I want you to suffer." I grabbed him by the mask and dragged him down the stairs. About halfway down the stairs, the mask came off, and I looked back to see a face that shook me to my core. I was 8 years old all over again, and staring into that room as I looked down at that face and saw one far too similar to my own. It was my father. The police rushed in and held us both at gunpoint. After sorting it out, my father was placed in handcuffs and taken to the hospital, and I was brought to the station for an interview. Ashley had been found in an upstairs closet. History has a strange way of repeating itself. After giving my statement and being given a ride home, I buried myself in a bottle of bourbon and stayed there for a month. Time passed. My father was waiting for trial, and I stayed as hammered as I humanly could. One day in November, my mother came by. She and Dad had divorced shortly after Maxine died. After rolling me off of the sofa and doing some light cleaning in my house, she brought me a cup of coffee and asked me to tell her what happened. I gave her all the details and she cried with me as I talked about the state in which I'd found Anna and Kara. At one point I asked, "Does this mean Dad killed Maxine too? What does he have against babysitters?" Mom sighed and said, "Maxine wasn't just your babysitter, son. She was your half-sister from your father's first marriage." The news floored me. She continued, "We were going to tell you that when you got older, but After she died, we thought it better to just leave it in the past. I had no idea your father had done such a horrible thing. I divorced him because of his temper, but I couldn't imagine him killing his own child. Mom and I talked for the rest of the day as I sobered up and fought a wicked hangover. When night finally came, she kissed me on the cheek before heading back to her car. Things got better for a few days, but then there was a knock on the door. I opened the door, and before me stood this dweeb in a brown suit coat with a manila envelope. He asked, "Are you Michael Westmoreland?" I nodded, and he said, "Consider yourself served. This is a notice of pending litigation from Mr. and Mrs. John Smith." He handed me the manila envelope, and I replied, "You have about 5 seconds to get off of my porch before I fuck you up so bad they can fit your remains in this manila envelope." He gulped and ran back to his car. I followed Dad's trial on the television while I met with my lawyer over the lawsuit. He assured me nothing would come of it and said it was just a grieving family lashing out the only way they knew how. 6 months passed and Dad's lawyers made a public spectacle of trying to cast reasonable doubt by saying that I was the real killer and that he was just there to save his family. Never mind that we hadn't seen or heard from him in years. The media was eating it up. The jury couldn't reach a verdict, and the judge declared it a mistrial. Dad was released, and his lawyer gave a speech about justice and whatnot. I was livid with rage. Ashley's testimony in the civil suit didn't help. She clearly remembered me saying, "Don't die yet. I want you to suffer." Seeing my wife and child murdered didn't disturb her near as much as my response to finding the killer. On one hand, I was hurt by the notion that my anger had injured a child. On the other, I was all the more enraged that my bastard of a father was walking the streets. A patrol car was parked outside of his apartment building. I had to park around the block and sneak in the back door. I walked up to his door, and as I reared back to kick it in, it opened slowly. Standing there in the doorway was my father. He was drunk and holding a bottle of bourbon. I rushed through the door and grabbed him by the throat with both hands. Through the spittle flying from my mouth and the look of sorrow on his face, I could barely make out his words when he said, "Do it." I took a step back and held my hands to my forehead as he said, "I'm not sorry, but do what you have to do, son. I understand." At that moment, the only word that could escape my mouth was, "Why?" Dad responded, "My mother was a whore. My sister was a whore. When your grandmother wasn't turning tricks, your aunt was watching me, and then I had to watch as she joined the family business. Strange men would come over at all hours of the night. Some of them were more than eager to play with the little boy that lived in the spare room, and before long, your grandmother was making more money off of me than she was off of her daughter. When I was 10 years old, I killed both of them while they slept. After that, I grew up in foster care." I swiped the bottle from his hand and took a long swig before responding. "But why kill Maxine? Why kill Anna and Kara?" My father stared forward and said, "Your sister was screwing boys twice her age while you slept in the other room. And I found out about it and realized I'd passed the whore gene onto a new generation. I didn't want my boy going through what I lived through, so I cut the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. Your daughter's showing the same pattern of behavior. Your mother and I still talked, and she told me about the alcohol and the boy, and I knew it was only a matter of time before you had to watch your little girl turn into a whore as well." I slammed the bottle against the wall and said, "But why Anna? What did she do to deserve all of this?" He leaned back in his seat and replied, "Collateral damage. She got there just as I made it up the stairs. I told her to leave, and she tried to fight me. In the process, she got the mean end of the knife. Your daughter didn't even scream. She just stood there staring at me like she knew it was meant to be." I reached into my pocket and pressed stop on the tape recorder, and then turned for the door. I dropped the bottle at his feet and turned my back to him as I walked out. He asked, "Is that it? You're just gonna let me live?" I didn't even respond. I gave the tape recorder to my lawyer and let him handle it. My dad was convicted at the next trial, and his taped confession, while ruled inadmissible in the criminal trial, was instrumental in getting the civil case against me thrown out. I have nothing left. I don't even know why I'm sharing this. When the judge asked my father if he had anything to say to the families of his victims at sentencing, his response was, "The sins of the father shall be visited onto the son."